Alright guys, today we're going to learn about conflict. And conflict, the definition of conflict is the problem in the story, alright? There are 7 main types of conflict. There is man versus character, or character versus character versus nature, character versus technology, character versus society, character versus fate, character versus the supernatural, and character versus self. You're going to notice that character versus self is the only internal conflict. So, we have 2 different types of conflicts, internal and external. Internal is a conflict inside yourself. So you're going to remember that because internal is like inside, okay? And external is outside, like an exit sign. That's how you're going to remember that. Exit, external, okay? So if a character has a problem with another character, that's a problem outside of themselves. If a character has a problem with nature, like they have to survive on their own, that's a problem outside of themselves. If they have to make some sort of decision, if they have to make a choice, that's an internal conflict, right? Conflict is important because conflict drives the plot. If there wasn't a problem, you wouldn't have a story, all right? Does anybody have any questions about conflict? Julia.
How do you distinguish the different types of conflict?
How do you distinguish the different types of conflict from one another? Well, what you have to ask yourself is, what problem is my character facing? Is my character facing a problem with his computer? If so, that's with technology. A lot of times in science fiction, you're going to run into problems with robotics, right? Like alternate intelligence, right? Like AI, okay? So artificial intelligence would be like a technology problem. If they're running into a problem with a ghost, that's going to be a supernatural. So it all depends on what your character is facing as to what the type of conflict is. Chase.
What if it happens to be somewhere in between? What would you choose?
What do you mean? Explain to me in between. Chase wanted to know what happens if it's in between 2 types of conflict.
Well, let's say there's, you're in the forest, there's tons of animals, and then they start coming in with huge machines and technology of all sorts.
Okay, then that's going to be, it would probably be technology, to be honest, right? Because if these animals are coming into the forest with these huge machines, there's something going on with those animals, right? That's letting them have this advanced technology. So it probably primarily fall under technology. You could also put nature, though, as well. I mean, just because there's one doesn't mean it's exclusively that one. Does that make sense? So it could fall under different categories. Anybody else have a question? Julian.
How does conflict affect the setting, or setting affect the conflict?
How does setting and conflict, how are setting and conflict linked? How can the setting affect the conflict? So let's pretend that you read Hatchet, right? And in Hatchet, this kid is traveling to Alaska, and then all of a sudden his plane crashes, and he's suddenly in a man versus nature situation, right? Because of the setting, that creates the conflict. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Yes.
I got a question about my book that I'm reading right now.
Okay.
He's like trying to survive in nature,
Uh-huh.
but he doesn't want to get found out by the city or newspaper. So which one would that be?
Okay. Well, it would actually probably be 2 things. It would be man versus nature, because he's trying to live on his own away from society. But it would also be character versus society, because he wants to stay away from people. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's probably a really good example of the mix of 2. Dalton, you have a question?
No.
Nope, no questions anymore. Yes.
How would you find the conflict if it was a story about a guy's life and it was just a story about his life and there's a lot of different conflicts?
So it's a biography or an autobiography?
Yeah.
Like, what's the main conflict? Well, there might not be a main conflict, right? There might be small conflicts along the way. So that's what you would talk about. Does it make sense? Anybody else have any questions? Anybody?